This video will examine the problems confronted by Europeans with the Church, the Hundred Years' War, and the Black Death. In reaction to the suffering and widespread death during the 14th century, many people naturally turned to religion for spiritual consolation and for explanations of what had gone wrong. But the spiritual authority of the Church was so dangerously weakened during this period that it failed to satisfy the popular craving for solace. The moral leadership that had made the papacy such a powerful force for reform during the 11th through 13th centuries was completely lacking in the 14th. Faced with anarchy in the streets of Rome as local aristocrats engaged in incessant feuding, a succession of 7 consecutive popes chose to reside in the relative calm in France. In 1309, this period of voluntary exile is known as the Babylonian captivity of the Church. The Pope's supposed subservience to the kings of France during this period dangerously politicized the papacy, destroying its ability to rise above the petty squabbles of the European princes. The beginning of the Hundred Years' War. Western Europe was further weakened during the 14th century by a prolonged war between its two largest and previously most stable kingdoms, England and France. The Hundred Years' War was a struggle over England's attempts to assert its claims to territories in France. The prolonged conflict drained resources from the aristocrats of both kingdoms, deepening and lengthening the economic depression. The Hundred Years' War sowed the seeds of a military revolution that by the 16th century transformed the kingdoms of Western Europe. In this transformation of the monarchies that had been ruled by relatively weak kings and strong aristocrats, it slowly evolved into modern states, ruled by strong monarchs who took many of the traditional privileges of the aristocrats in order to centralize authority and strengthen military prowess. The outbreak of the Black Death. Following on the heels of the Great Famine, the Black Death arrived in Europe in the spring of 1348 with brute force. The plague reached Europe in October of 1347 when merchants from Genoa brought it from the Crimea to the island of Sicily off the coast of Italy. The plague spread quickly, reaching southern Italy and southern France and Spain by the end of 1347. Usually, the diffusion of the Black Death followed commercial trade routes. In 1348, the plague spread from France and the Low Countries and into Germany. By the end of that year, it had moved to England, ravaging it in 1349. By the end of 1349, the plague had reached Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and Russia was also affected by 1351, although mortality rates were never as high there as they were in Western and Central Europe. Mortality figures for the Black Death were incredibly high. Italy was hit especially hard. Its crowded cities suffered losses of 50 to 60%. In northern France, farming villages suffered mortality rates of 30%, while cities experienced losses as high as 3%. In England and Germany, entire villages simply disappeared. To conclude, by the 1340s, nearly all of Europe was in an endless cycle of disease and famine. Then came the deadliest epidemic in European history, the Black Death, which killed at least 1/3 of the total population. The economy collapsed. Trade disappeared. Industry shriveled. Hopeless peasants and urban workers revolted against their masters, demanding relief for their families. Neither church nor state could provide it. The popes had left the dangerous streets of Rome for France, where they were obliged to extort money to survive. The two great medieval kingdoms of France and England became locked in an endless struggle that depleted royal treasuries and wasted the aristocrats in a series of clashes that historians call the Hundred Years' War. European culture became obsessed with death. Of all the frightening elements of these disasters, perhaps most frightening was that their causes were hidden or completely unknowable given the technology and medical understanding that became available only a century ago. In many respects, the West was held captive by the climate, economic forces that no one completely understood, and microbes that would not be identified for another 550 years.